let's get this segment going. All right, I mentioned 7-on-7, right? We got state 7-on-7 coming up this weekend. We're all except Craven because, he got out of it smartly. We'll all be sweating in College Station this next week, the rest of the week, I should say. And so we decided, let's put a little topical flavor to the discussion before we talk to Carlos. And so we're going to do a little draft, right? We're not exactly drafting the most logical 7-on-7 teams, right? We know how 7-on-7 teams are constructed. We're just basically drafting 7 positions, right? As opposed to like 7 rosters or whatever. We're not filling out a perfect field or whatever. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Mallory, do you want to conduct this? How are we going to do this? Because we should probably figure out a way to draft, how we're going to draft
so we actually came up with a draft format yesterday. I can go ahead and start. So we're each going to pick a quarterback, a running back, a wide receiver, an offensive line and a defensive line as a unit. We're not going player by player for that just because it would take too long. A linebacker, a defensive back, and then at the very end, we're going to pick a coach. So then as a whole, that will be our complete 7-on-7 team. And I think we're going to pick players that we think will be, they're not necessarily the best players in Texas.
Sure.
They're basically the players that we think would fit or do really well at 7-on-7.
Yeah.
So without further ado, I'll go ahead and start with the quarterback. Let's see. I went ahead and picked Tanner Mordecai from SMU. I think this dude is a total gunslinger. He's got a quick release, and I think he's also a great decision maker. He can make decisions like that right on the spot. I think he'd be a great quarterback at 7-on-7.
Yeah, I could go somebody else, but I'm going to kind of probably skip the line when it comes to the rankings of quarterbacks that we have in the state. I'm going Frank Harris at UTSA. When I think of a quarterback who the issues with Frank Harris are anything beyond 20, 30, 40 yards, right? That's kind of where his negative has been. You don't really need that in 7-on-7. You need somebody who's elite from 10 to 20 yards. Yeah. I think Frank Harris is that. I think he's somebody who can move around. Obviously, you only get 4 seconds or whatever to throw. But I think he's somebody who can move, find something to happen, make something happen, get a little dump-off pass if he needs to. I'm going Frank Harris as my quarterback.
I love it.
I feel like y'all are handing me this one.
Sure.
I think if I had the number 1 pick, I would have taken Clayton Tune. I'd get him at number 3. 3,500 yards last year, 30 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, or 10 interceptions. 4 of those came in the first game. So only 6 interceptions the last 13 games, really turned the corner. I love him as a 7-on-7 quarterback. He can move around a little bit, can throw on the run. So I get to start there with the number 3 pick on what I believe could be the best quarterback in the state.
Very true. Very true. All right, we're going snake on this.
Oh, yeah.
Craven,
you're up next now.
Running back, this one felt like the easiest pick in the entire draft. Like Bijan Robinson, in my mind, for my money, is the best player in the state when he's healthy, just overall talent-wise. When I was on the recruiting trail, I saw 2 guys that were like, oh, that dude's an NFL player. One was Trevor Lawrence at the Nike opening. The other one was Bijan Robinson when I went out to Arizona. He's a stud, and I think even in a 7-on-7 format, with how well he catches the ball out of the backfield like we saw last year, he can be a real weapon.
Yeah.
Sure. I went with Devon Achane. I think if you have somebody who is able to line up at wide receiver if you need him to, right, in a pinch, somebody who can flare out of the backfield and catch a pass, I think that you need that in 7-on-7 game. I also think he's in for a pretty big breakout year now that Isaiah Spiller's out. And so we've seen flashes of it, right? He's been that big play running back for A&M for a couple years now, and now it's like, okay, now he's the feature back. I'm really excited to see what he can do. I think outside of Bijan Robinson, you're not going to find many running backs in the open field that are more dynamic than he.
Yeah, fastest kid in the state.
Easily.
Yeah. Up next was me. I picked Taj Brooks from Texas Tech. He caught 6 passes for 58 yards last year out of the backfield. I think he's a quick guy, and I think he's able to spot those holes pretty quickly. I think he'd be a good wide receiver.
I do think it's important to note, like Alton McCaskill from Houston,
he would
probably
be on this list.
He'd be probably our first pick, I'm sure.
Definitely one of the
gone.
top running backs if he was healthy, but he tore his ACL and may not even play in 2022.
Yeah, and I mean we should also mention like other names like Trey Siggers, things like that, like guys who would be in the discussion, right?
Yeah.
But the states, I think
like
we're in a
Kamar
pretty good
Wheaton.
spot when it comes to exactly Kamar Wheaton. Like we're in a pretty good spot
Yeah.
when it comes to running back depth going on. Mallory, you're up again, wide receiver.
Yes, I think this one's pretty obvious. I picked Xavier Worthy from Texas. I think he's an extremely fast guy who can really create that space between him and the defender. So I think he'd be a good another 7-on-7 wide receiver.
I think it goes. There's 2, right? There were 2 names when it came to wide receiver, and I think there's not a huge drop off, but then a drop off.
Yeah.
I'm taking the other guy, Tank Dell from Houston. I think that outside of Xavier Worthy, I can't think of a more explosive playmaker for what I think he's helped mask a lot of Toon's weaknesses when he had that option out there, right? To be like somebody's in trouble. I need an outlet. There's Nathaniel Dell, and he's going to get a big play going.
Yeah.
And so I think he's complemented Clayton Toon's growth as well. And yeah, I think if you just have, I think it's one of those two first. Whoever had the first two picks, I think was going to take one of those two. And then after that, it's more of a discussion. But Craven, who are you looking at?
Yeah, speaking of just Worthy and Dell, like one of the toughest decisions in the magazine was figuring like who do I pick as best wide receiver in the state?
Sure,
because both of those guys are deserving. Like Worthy as a true freshman was incredible. Nathaniel Dell, when he plays in the slot, may be the best slot receiver in college football. He struggles on the outside sometimes because he's only like 155 pounds and you can jam him and stuff like that. But in the slot and in a place like 7-on-7 where you're not supposed to be physical and that kind of stuff, like he's a really good wide receiver in the slot. I had a tough one. I think wide receiver is the deepest position in the state.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Zachary Franklin at UTSA was a name that came to mind. I'm a UTSA Roadrunner, so that was a hard one to pass up. But I went with Quentin Johnston, the wide receiver from TCU. Averaged 19.2 yards a catch. I'd imagine if we had a slam dunk competition in the state between college football players, he's winning. I've seen him do a 360 between the leg, like legit dunk at a camp one time when he was in high school. Like just a freak athlete that I don't know you could find somebody to cover him. Like I don't know who's jumping with him if I just throw up the ball. So my plan is just Clayton Toon, just throw it up. Quentin Johnston goes get it. You play two high safety. We're giving it to Bajan.
I was about to say,
we're
like,
cooking right now.
You think of that gadget player, right? That could also be an option somewhere else, right? You could spell out Bajan or whatever and put Quentin Johnston back there and line him up out of the backfield. Like just anything, like that. I think he's a pretty impressive pick. And
because the other two guys are skinny.
Sure.
Like they're smaller, skinny guys. Like Quentin Johnston's
you want to bully.
Man.
Yeah, you want to bully a wide receiver.
Man. And I've been to enough 7-on-7 to know that those dudes win a lot of battles.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, and then offensive line. So this is a little bit different. I just wanted a way to get offensive line, defensive line involved. I think we skip the big guys too much in these type of conversations. So we're going to do it as a unit. I think the clear and away best offensive line in the state is Baylor. 4 out of 5 starters back. Connor Galvin,
probably the best
left
offensive
tackle.
line coach right now in Eric Mateus.
Yeah. I mean, some of it's the wide zone, that they run. Because that, what's crazy is that offensive line struggled a lot in 2020. And, like, pretty much the same group of guys other than Jacob Gall at center come back in 2021 and become the best offensive line, or at least one of the best offensive lines in the nation. Definitely the best in the state. Connor Galvin, Big 12 Offensive Lineman of the Year last year. He's back. Jacob Gall at center is back. So a lot of really good players there. They led Abram Smith had 1,600 and something yards, broke a record at Baylor behind those guys. So I'm picking the Baylor offensive line as the best offensive line in the state.
All right. I'm going with A&M. Obviously, they have some holes to replace this year, but I think you have two guys in Bryce Foster and Ruben Fothery. I mean, you give me a tackle, you give me an elite guard, I think I can make the rest work, right?
Yeah.
So I think those two guys kind of make the rest of the building around whatever you're replacing easier. And so I think you have athletes as well, right? Those are guys that can move. I know, again, 7-on-7 is not incredible 1-to-1, but we wanted to include the guys here because it's easier to say, I don't know, Bryce Foster can snap a ball in 7-on-7, right? It's easier. It's easier just to include them this way as opposed to I don't know who's going to hold the ball and hold the marker that they use in the field.
What's been awesome about this Texas A&M offensive line is we know Fothery and Foster are like future stars. A guy who's really emerging is Layden Robinson.
Interesting.
The more and more preseason magazines that are coming out and the big articles, Layden Robinson is a guy who's going to be really good at guard who may creep up the NFL draft boards as well.
Valerie, what you got?
I went with the North Texas offensive line. I think that this unit had to do it. You set me up for it.
15, not even 15 minutes into the
You set me up for it. I think this unit as a whole was one of the main reasons that the Mean Green were able to reach 6 wins last year. Of course, they do have a couple of holes to fill. It was not quarterback. It was not quarterback. They do have a couple of holes to fill. Jacob Brahmer, of course, transferring to Vanderbilt, but they are led by is it Manasseh Mose? Is that how you pronounce it, Craven? Manasseh Mose. I think they're just a big physical unit up front, and I think they'd be a great unit.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that one of the cool things to watch this year is there's going to be 6-year starters.
Sure,
which sounds insane.
That's
right. With 2020 not counting and all that kind of stuff. You have legit 6-year seniors that could start 60 games, and he's one of them. I think
60 games. That's right.
He enters the year with 48. So
That's crazy.
If they play
nuts.
12, he's at 60. If they, play in a bowl game and a conference championship game, I mean, he could really leave college with 62 starts.
That's absurd.
At offensive line. Like, that's NFL tenure.
Yeah.
I know. That's just wild.
Like he's gonna get like a residency at North Texas or something like that. So that's just amazing. That's just like another little layer to why. I agree with you at North Texas. I think some people will see this on social media and be like, North Texas, how can they be the? They're really good. Like North Texas scored 32 rushing touchdowns last year. Like I'm a big believer, and this is probably something that'll be picked up if you listen to the podcast. Like give me the running. If you're talking the running game, offensive line's bigger, more important piece of running back.
Right.
Like, I think rush yards are more indicative of how good you are at offensive line than running back. North Texas, I think some people will scoff. They'll see Baylor, A&M, North Texas, and feel like there's this drop off. There's really not. Like that North Texas offensive line, like peer to peer, like for their level, is as dominant and as good as some of those other ones we mentioned.
For sure.
All right, now let's switch over to the defense. The defensive line I chose was Baylor. Not really much of a shock here. Probably one of the best defensive lines in the state. They're big physical guys, able to get to the quarterback quickly, and I think they averaged like 3.5 sacks a game last year, so really not a surprise there.
Yeah. I went a little off the beaten path. I want UTEP because
How about the Miners?
I think you have one of the best defensive linemen in the state in Praise Amawule. I think you have one of the things that they were able to, for all the praise that their passing offense got, right? We talked about all the time how they were kind of mediocre as far as like down to down, but they would hit these explosive plays. Justin Garrett and oh my God, I'm already forgetting the other one.
Jacob
Cowing, Jesus. And that kind of like masked a lot of their inconsistencies on offense. But consistently, game in, game out, it was that defensive line. It was that front seven that kept them in the game because, again, they weren't holding on to the ball a lot. It was those one or two big plays that would kind of swing a game because their defense kept them in so many so many contests. And so I think it was that front seven, more specifically that defensive line led by Praise Amawule with 5.5 sacks as interior defensive lineman, which is pretty damn impressive.
Yeah, JJ and Taylor is also really good. Keegan Stewart there at defensive tackle. I love that front seven. I really love the UTEP defense is great. Dennis Bard's secondary, really good. What's interesting about Baylor, like we just had Baylor be the first pick on the offensive line, first pick of the defensive line, and there's not going to be another Baylor player on there.
Right.
Like they're going to be a very interesting case study of like, they say you win in the trenches. Well, like they're going to have to win in the trenches.
Yeah.
Like we're about to find out how true that adage is. I went with SMU. Like I think that they're probably the most underrated defensive line. When you look at it, Turner Cox on the outside. You got, I have it right here. Elijah Chapman on the inside, a defensive. Jalen Samuels is somebody who came out of spring practice with a lot of praise. So I think they're deep. I think they're talented. And then with this new system coming in, I think that they're going to be unleashed and used in a way this year with that 4-man front that's going to really help the bodies there. I think SMU is going to have. We think of SMU as an offensive team, and they'll probably continue to be that with Rhett Lashley. But this defense has a chance to be better than it has the last couple of years, and that's going to help them towards the end of the year. SMU's kind of had really good starts the last 3 or 4 years and then faded off. I think with that front seven being better, with the defensive line being better, they have a chance to really make some noise late in the year.
Sure.
It's you now again.
Oh, yeah, Snake.
Me again.
Snake.
Me again. The 3-person thing is kind of hard because
I know.
you're like constantly going 2 in a row. I had the first pick linebacker. I went to Marvion Overshown.
Homer.
Texas, right? Yeah, I covered a lot of those recruiting
second
classes.
Texas guy on the list.
I know. There's going to be another one. Like you forget about bias, right? Like when you're like unaware biases. Right? And I covered all these guys when I was doing recruiting at the Statesman. Overshown, 5-star safety out of ARP. I feel like in a 7-on-7 setting, he's the ideal linebacker. Big, long, rangy, can play in space, not afraid to cover. So for these purposes, I would pick him as the kind of most equipped linebacker for playing against the spread.
Sure. I disagree. I think that there is another linebacker who's probably more equipped to play 7-on-7, and that is North Texas Katie Davis.
Yes.
I need somebody,
Shark.
and when I'm thinking 7-on-7, obviously I'm thinking of somebody who needs to cover sideline to sideline, right? And I think that's somebody like KD Davis who 121 tackles, 5.5 sacks, 2 forced fumble recoveries, I should say, 16 tackles for loss. He can cover so much of that field on his own, often did for North Texas last year. I think that's somebody who in open space is somebody reliable, and I think he's probably the best linebacker in the state.
Yeah.
And I think that he's somebody who I would love to have in my 7-on-7 team.
Yep. I went with D. Winters out of TCU.
I like that.
really think that he's probably one of the best defensive players that TCU is going to have this year. He also had 2 interceptions on the year last year, so I would love to have that dude on my 7-on-7 team.
I think he's aimed for a big year. Like going into last year, there was a lot of expectations for Winters, and that front 7 was just so bad. You know, like he's
like Hodges Tomlinson too.
Right.
I mean, both those guys like, oh man, they didn't live up to the hype. I was like, they were left on islands.
And
so
right.
much.
Winters is a linebacker that needs block eaters up in front of him.
Yeah.
Like, and
he's not a 130 tackle guy.
Right. Like he's somebody who needs some space, and like he needs a couple defensive tackles who just occupy blocks, and he runs around and makes plays. Like TCU just didn't have that this year. Sonny Dykes is bringing in an odd man front with Joe Gillespie, a defensive coordinator, and I think they're going to have more of those big guys up front that allow like a Shadrick Banks, a D Winters just to run around, Marcel Brooks to just be athletic and run around and make plays. It'll be a complete. Watching the TCU defense this year is going to be like Twilight Zone stuff.
Well, speaking of that, I've completely forgot that Shadrick Banks was a linebacker for TCU. So, like, I just went back. I was like, you said Shadrick Banks. I was like, oh, right, he is a linebacker now, huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've just watched the 4-2-5. Like, you watch TCU.
Right,
you
run the
watch Gary
same,
Patterson's
the same
4-2-5
defense
for our whole adult lives.
Right.
Like, you know, I was 17 years old when Gary Patterson became the head coach at TCU. So, to watch them
Jerry
play,
Hughes' NFL career came and went.
Right,
in that time span.
And we're about to watch them play an odd man front.
Yeah.
And it's going to be odd.
That's weird. Yeah.
I had the next pick going into defensive backs. I put Antonio Johnson out of A&M, which is probably a pretty obvious choice.
Best defensive player in the state.
For sure. Big, fast dude who can definitely be utilized in different spots in the secondary. So definitely like him as my DB.
I think that's his number one skill set, honestly.
I think so, too.
He can play corner, he can play nickel, he can play safety.
Yep.
Like, that's just a guy. Like that's like he's just counting down days. Like if you're an Aggie fan, you just pencil him into the NFL draft in 2024.
Exactly.
Right?
He's a first rounder for
he's,
sure.
He's unbelievable. He's excellent.
Yeah, and he kind of got overshadowed for a little bit on that stacked defense last year. Now he's going to be one of the guys kind of breaking through. I mentioned him. My pick, Hodges Tomlinson. Like, I think he's somebody who's in for a better year. Again, I think when you lose the help that they had at the secondary heading into last year, you have a front 7 that just does not produce a pass rush at all. And you're getting carved up in the run as well. Like, the front 7 was just really bad, and specifically defensive line. And so I think now having help there, I think he's now in a better position to not be left on an island, to not be left basically saying, yeah, cover the receivers that are going to have 5-7 seconds to run free, right? Eventually they're just going to get away from you, right?
Yeah.
I think he's going to have a lot easier of a time getting around that and being able to cover his spots. So I'm taking him. I think he's kind of a breakout candidate. He's somebody who's already good, and we already acknowledge him as being one of the better defensive backs in the state. But I think now it's going to be somebody who's more known probably on a national stage heading into the end of the year.
I mean, that TCU defense was bad last year, and he was still first team All Big 12. Like
exactly.
that's just like how good he is and how much respect he gets in this league. He had to play some safety last year, which was out of position. So he'll just get to play cornerback this year, and it'll be 10-on-10 football, right? Like if you're playing against TCU, go throw it against somebody else. Why take your chances on there? I went with Rashad Wisdom. UTSA safety.
Good
He was the first kid I wrote a story on when I got this job. I'm a big fan of him. I covered him when he was coming out of Judson. He was with DeMarvin Leal, Sincere McCormick. That really good Converse Judson team that really helped turn UTSA around with McCormick on offense, Wisdom on defense. Frank Harris also part of that same group. So, he's a guy who can cover from the deep position, but he's just a leader, and he's an organizer, and he's always where you want him to be. And 7-on-7, that can be a pretty valuable thing. I think y'all took the 2 best corners in the state, so it was like, okay, I'll take the best safety.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty telling that for the past couple of years, now that he's been there, it's been Frank Harris and Rashad Wisdom, right? As far as like the faces of UTSA, everybody talks about Sincere McCormick and Sakari Franklin and all that, but like when you look at them doing charity work or promo or anything like that, it's those 2 guys. And I think it's pretty clear that like Jeff Traylor, that was a thing that was under Frank Wilson too, pretty clear that he trusted those guys. And now that Jeff Traylor's taken over, like he's clearly came in and said, oh, these 2 guys from San Antonio, they love the city, they love the program. Like they're the guys that you want marketing.
When Jeff Traylor was hired, he had his press conference and he asked the athletic director at the time, like, who are a couple of the guys on the team that I need to call tonight? And Rashad Wisdom was his first call, because like that is the dude there. If he was 4 inches taller, he would have been a 5-star recruit with pick of wherever he wanted to go. Like he's been productive at every level he plays, and there's just not many young men that are as good at leading as Rashad Wisdom. He's just like he's just gonna be one of those guys that's successful at whatever he's gonna do. He's gonna run a Fortune 500 company or something like that. Like whatever he decides to do, he's gonna be good.
Sure. All right, coaches.
Let's round it all out, Craven.
Let's do it.
Okay, I went back to my University of Texas
Homer.
Well, we're playing 7-on-7. I'm taking Steve Sarkisian. Listen,
I get it. Throw your horns up.
I don't have to block anybody. I don't have to go sack the quarterback. Right? We're just talking about 7-on-7, and the dude's a wizard. Chris Jericho, Steve Sarkisian. Like just absolute wizards, and I would
wrestling reference number one on the show.
I had to fit one in by the time we got to our first interview. I just feel like if I was to enjoy watching anybody call a 7-on-7 game, and there's not many people who could make me enjoy any type of 7-on-7 game because it's just recess.
Sure,
I would pick Steve Sarkisian to be that guy because some of the stuff he would call would be amazing.
I love it. Ish is currently dying.
That's all 7-on-7 is. While Ish is laughing, let's take to the first Craven's Corner, which is a rant.
That's
on
our newest
7-on-7.
segment, by the way. It's going to be Craven's Corner. So if you've got any ideas for that,
like
let us
me
know.
being an old man on a hill, and mine is 7-on-7 is just recess. That's all it is. Like if you go to Duncanville Middle School right now, 5th period, and walk outside, you can watch 7-on-7. And it's going to be better than 90% of the people that make it to College Station because they're like from towns with 150 people in.
That's also a hot take,
right?
too.
So we don't have to pretend to like 6-man football here.
God.
Or 7-on-7.
Anyway, I'm moving on to that. That's where you pull the ripcord on that.
Y'all gave me a live mic.
We did give you a live mic.
We did.
I warned everybody.
First mistake number one, honestly.
Everybody, when this idea was presented to me, I went to everybody.
I got to pick a coach, Craven.
Okay, sorry.
Reeling it back in here.
Oh, God. All right. So, on that line of thinking, and with another wrestling reference, I'm picking the Orange Cassidy of Texas coaches. I'm picking Jake Spavital.
Homer.
Damn right it's Homer. Look, what's 7-on-7 about? It's about getting a couple yards here and there, getting your first down, right?
Yep.
Inching your way down the field, right? For all of people's complaints about Jake Spavital, it's a man that loves short routes, loves tunnel screens, loves the way to maneuver his way down the field very meticulously. Yeah, somebody who's calm, right? 7-on-7 can get a little frantic when you're starting to realize you got 30 seconds to score a touchdown and try to get a pick or whatever. He's calm.
Yeah, still calls his own plays.
Still calls his own plays. It's all good, baby.
See, that's the thing you got to think about with 7-on-7 too.
Yeah.
Like you need to have people who can really perform under pressure, like more than probably anything else, because it is such a quick game, you know. So. You may go ahead and round it.
Like he's the air raid guy,
right?
You know, so
exactly,
he's been
exactly.
7-on-7 his whole life,
right?
Speaking of another air raid guy, I chose to round it all out as my coach, Dana Holgerson of Houston. Pretty obvious pick. Yeah, complete air raid guy mindset. He's gonna throw the ball all over the field. Love it.
Yeah. Return into his roots, because he told me he got kicked out of the air raid because he runs the ball too much. 7-on-7, you won't have to worry about that.
I was about to say,
he gets to be himself, the Kevin Kolb version of Dana Holgerson.
I'm down for that.
So before we go ahead and go, I can just throw up these graphics real quick of our teams.
We'll put these up on social,
we're going to put these up on social as well, so you can go and we'll put a poll up there too. You can go and vote to see whose team is the best, or whose team, better yet, whose team would win.
Yeah,
7-on-7.
Whose team would, if these teams
we'll do a round robin
right.
kind of thing, yeah. And so whose team would win it all? So we'll first go with mine. We got Tanner Mordecai at quarterback, Taj Brooks running back, Xavier Worthy at wide receiver, the North Texas offensive line, the Baylor defensive line, D. Winters of TCU, Antonio Johnson of A&M, and Dana Holgerson of Houston.
I think you have the best defense.
Oh, for sure. I think so, too.
I
was going to say that. I think
impressive.
We got rounded out. And Ishmaels. You got Frank Harris at quarterback, Devon Achane at running back, Nathaniel Dell at wide receiver, the Texas A&M offensive line, the UTEP defensive line, Katie Davis, linebacker, Travius Hodges-Tomlinson at defensive back, and Jake Spavital for coach.
Sorry, I got the most track meet?
Yes. I'm sorry. I got the most fun offense.
Yeah. You really got a fun. That's going to be a quick game if you got that offense.
Oh, my God. Yes.
That's a lot of speed.
Yeah. That's a lot of speed. And to round it out, we got Craven's team. Got Clayton Toon at quarterback.
A lot of burnt orange.
That's a lot of burnt orange on there. Bijan Robinson at running back, Quentin Johnston at wide receiver, Baylor offensive line, SMU defensive line, DeMarvion Overshone at linebacker, Rashad Wisdom at defensive back, and Steve Sarkisian at coach.
That is-
Once
that
again,
is
we're
a
going
lot
to
of
put those up.
Longhorns.
That is a lot of Longhorns. Once again, we're going to put those up on Twitter, and you guys can vote on whose team
We're gonna
would
win the
be
first half.
victorious. Yeah.
That's very true.
We're gonna be up. We're gonna be up going into halftime.
Yep. Whatever happens after that, that's up to you because
We don't know.
You got Steve Sarkisian as your head
We'll
coach,
see.
buddy. So we'll
We'll
see
see.
about that. That's a team that by November, everybody's like, why isn't the other quarterback starting?
Right.
Why is
Right.
Steve Sarkisian still calling plays? Why is our defense still giving? Anyway, I can go on for
Be like Clayton Tune's thumb is like 8 times the size. you know?
yeah.